Now, in August of 2007, I was enrolled at the University of Johannesburg. I lived in a very shady part of Joburg called Brixton. Now, Brixton's only advantage was that it was fairly close to the university, so I could walk there, but at the same time, it also offered cheap accommodation. I was young and broke, so I was renting out a single room in a commune, and the only wealth that I could really lay any claim to was that I had good grades, except accounting. First year accounting was tough 4 years, and I had good friends. So when one of my friends called me, his name was Mfundo, and it continues to be Mfundo, it's not like it changed. But when Mfundo called me at 1 a.m. on a school night, and he says to me that he's had an emergency and he needs help, he needs me to come get him so that he can crash at my place, I don't think anything of it. It's not a big deal. I just get out of bed, I put on my flip-flops, and I walk to campus. Now, as I am walking, I turn into a street that has the campus on it. As I walk through this street, there's a party that is raging at one of the houses. If the smell of weed and the sound of music is anything to go by, the people at the party are having the time of their lives. Now, I don't think anything of this because this is varsity, and in varsity, the students do two things very well and very frequently. They party all night and they study all night. They often have to party, they often have to study all night because they've been partying for so many nights in a row. So I don't think anything of it. Instead, I just walk past and go to my destination. So once there, I meet with my friend, and he tells me about the terrible night that he's been having. He tells me about the fact that when he got home and he wanted to put his key in the door, it broke, thereby locking him out of his apartment. About how when he called me and we arranged to meet up on campus, he got there, but he also had a run-in with boys from one of the residences. And on this night, for whatever reason, they opted that they're going to be throwing eggs at passers-by. And when Mfundo was passing by, they decided they were going to whip out the rotten ones. How do you purchase rotten eggs? Like, do you buy them that way? Do you buy fresh eggs and then allow them to rot in your house for such a special occasion? That level of dedication to being an awful person is simply mind-blowing. It's like a rotten egg throwing a rotten egg, but I digress. So we finally make it off campus. This is me and Mfundo. We're walking towards my house, and we pass again by the party house. The party animals are still doing their thing, and I don't know what it is about being young and naive that gives you a false and fleeting sense of invincibility. Because the whole time that Mfundo and I are walking and talking, we're embroiled in our conversation, and it never occurs to us that we might be in any sort of danger or that this night has any more horrors left to offer. Despite the fact that there is a Volkswagen City Golf parked outside the party house, and we know that this is the car of choice for the criminal elements of Johannesburg. Despite all of this, we continue as though nothing is happening. Maybe, and I'm speculating, but maybe it's also because we've already paid Joburg tax. By this stage in the game, Mfundo and I had separately been robbed, been mugged, and gone through pretty much the most. So maybe that's why we thought that it couldn't happen again. I don't know. What I do know is that as we turn the corner to get back into my street, we hear a car coming up behind us, and it is going at lightning speed. So we turn to look at it, only to discover that the passenger side door is actually open as they are driving. And even at this moment, it still hasn't occurred to us that anything sinister is afoot. Instead, I think to myself, wow, those guys must really want to get where they're going. It's not until the car screeches to a halt immediately after seeing us and one of the passengers disembarks from the back seat that I realize that we are where they're going. We're the destination. What happens next happens quickly. A man emerges from the back seat and he's got a gun in his hand. He's screaming something, but it doesn't matter what he's saying, because at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't listen to words, you don't read lips, you read intentions, and none of his were good. How did we know? We saw the silver glint of moonlight hit the gun, and we knew that this was getting very real very quickly. Mfundo, when he picks up on this, resigns himself to the fact that this is what's happening tonight. Afterwards, when we finally were able to talk about it again, he said to me, you know, I just figured there was nothing we could do, and I just had to accept that we're getting robbed. So I was actually walking towards them to give them my my phone. But something happened to me, happened in me, happened around me, I don't know. But this time, I just couldn't accept the idea that I was going to be a victim again. So even as Mfundo was beginning to walk towards them, I said 2 words. I said, Mfundo, run. And that's what we did. This must have startled their assailants because immediately his gun fell to the ground. And as he stopped to pick it up, in a relay race when people are running and passing each other the baton, and if one of you happens to fumble that baton, you give your opponents an opportunity to gain some ground. That's exactly what that was, except this was more life and death. And we ran. That was all the gap that we needed. I don't know. Have you ever run for your life? Like, has the speed with which you are able to put one foot in front of the other ever been the difference between life and death, between getting home and getting shot? Trust me, if you lived through something like that once, you don't want to live through it again. We ran. And because Mfundo is taller than me, with each stride that he's taking, he's outpacing me, and the gap between us is widening. And out of my fear, I just say to my friend, Mfundo, don't leave me. Fear is a funny thing in retrospect. But in the moment, I just didn't want to be the gazelle that the lion catches. I didn't want to be the kudu that winds up in the jaws of the animal that's hunting us. I don't know if you heard me, like to this day, I don't know if you heard me, but I do know that despite the fact that we were running uphill, we started to switch gears. He switched into a gear where the keys fell out of his pocket and he belted it. The shoes flew off of my feet and it wasn't even a conscious decision. It was just what was happening for us to get away. We ran and nobody was looking back. When we got to the rise, because I lived in a bit of an uphill area, when we got to the rise, the crest of the small hill where we lived, we were able to look back and look down and to see that the man that was chasing us had gone from sprinter to jogger to walking to looking at us to looking for us because he couldn't quite make contact with us anymore. And it was clear that he was out of breath, and that's probably the only thing that saved us. And he stooped down to pick something up off the ground and then went back down, presumably to get the car. That was the gap that we needed because immediately I opened my gate and if I say that we walked, I'm being generous, we slumped onto the cool veranda floor and just sat there, chests heaving, drenched in sweat, not even trying to regain our composure, but simply trying to regain our breath, just happy to be alive. When you go through an experience like that, it's not that you want to be alone, but the thing you have gone through drags you back into itself. Mfundo and I sat there for what must have been 10 minutes, maybe more, and it was in utter silence. We couldn't muster the energy to stand up and go inside the house, even though we knew if these guys drove past, they were immediately going to see us. But it's like when you've been through a flooded area and it's just after the flood and you're just walking through the debris trying to make sense and take stock of what the hell just happened. After the now cool night air had actually finished bathing our lungs and we were able to talk about it again, we managed to piece together the pieces and to understand that what must have happened is that when I walked to campus to get Mfundo, they must have seen me. When we walked back together, they must have decided and hatched on a plan to rob us. When they drove past with their doors open, it was so that they could pounce on us that much more easily. And when the thief had stooped down to pick something up, those were Mfundo's keys. They must have assumed that now once they've got these keys, we wouldn't have any place that we could enter. And so they would prowl the streets of Brixton in the hopes that they could rob us. It's exhausting. When I stood up so that we could get inside the house, Mfundo then noticed that my feet were bare and he said, "We're going to need to go back and get your shoes." I looked at my friend and said, "Yeah, but not tonight though. Those shoes probably need the fresh air and I and you, we just need to get some sleep, dog. And that's exactly what we proceeded to do. And that's how a gun saved my life.